Hi, welcome to the Badass Breastfeeding Podcast. This is Dianne, your lactation consultant.
And I'm Abby, the Badass Breastfeeder. And today's episode is brought to you by Fairhaven Health. Fairhaven Health brings you the Milk Saver on the go, the mini version of the wildly popular original Milk Saver that collects your leaking breast milk. And today's episode is also brought to you by the Family Wellness Summit 2020 that Dianne and I are both a part of. It is a free 5-day virtual conference being held all online January 1st through the 5th. Registration is now open, and we will hear more about those later in the show. But right now, Dianne has our review of the week, I think.
I do. This is from Jen Terp. She said, this podcast, oh, wait a minute. This podcast gave me life in the midst of my breastfeeding journey. Everyone was telling me my son should be gaining more weight, sleeping through the night, my milk wasn't fatty enough, you name it, someone told it to me. I found this podcast and realized that everything about my son was normal. We've now been nursing for almost a year, and I've never been more proud of us. Thank you for all your wisdom and research on breastfeeding. Thank you. And if you have not...
Thank you.
Everybody else, if you have not listened to The Myths That Won't Die, this is what, like...
That's a really good one.
Yeah, and this is what she's talking about here. All this crap that people say that is not a thing. So
I feel like we could do like a monthly Myths That Won't Die.
Oh my God, we should, right?
Because there's so many of them that are not just like... They're not just like little ones, you know, they're like huge pieces of information that are being passed everywhere, and they're just wrong.
They are. They're wrong and ridiculous. And they just need to die. But they won't die. Which is why
It just won't die.
It just won't die. But that is our review of the week. So thank you so much, Jen, for reminding us about the myths that don't die. And we would love to hear your reviews. Like, we love them. We love to hear what has worked for you, why it's worked for you, what you think of the podcast, suggestions, any of that stuff. And you can leave us reviews on iTunes because that really helps us, and we love that. Or if you don't listen and can't on iTunes and you can't do it like that, then shoot us an Instagram message or a Facebook message or an email at badassbreastfeedingpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll get it that way too.
I want to say something about that too. So if you do have iTunes, actually iTunes is the way that our podcast is most listened to. I guess probably most podcasts. I don't know. But we could tell by the listens that most of them are coming from iTunes.
Yeah.
And if you are on iTunes, like, this podcast is free and it's going to be free for you. But one thing that you could do to help us, because the reviews actually help us, I think, rank higher in searches on iTunes. That's one of the things I think that, I don't know, iTunes like picks up on.
Yeah.
If you have iTunes and can leave a review, that is something that you could do to kind of help like bring this podcast to more people, is to like boost the amount of reviews there are. And so that would be something that you could do to help if you would like to help the podcast.
Keep us alive. Keep us alive.
Please and thank you.
Yes, please and thank you. And I'm really glad that you explained it like that, because we're always just like, oh yeah, leave a review. It helps us. And like, we're selfishly want people to tell us how wonderful we are, but that's really not what it's about.
But we do love it. We do want to read them, and thank you for that. But it also does help. It is something that you can do to kind of help the podcast.
Yeah, so that's awesome. Thank you. And we are talking about today, this actually came from an email request from someone who asked about milk storage guidelines. And I guess, like, it's so funny because when people will like send us messages or leave us Facebook messages or leave us, posts or whatever, and they'll be like, hey, do you have a podcast on milk storage guidelines? And I'm like, do we? Oh my gosh. Like, how have we not talked about that yet? Like, so sometimes things are like mixed into a podcast episode.
I know.
But like, this is something I don't think we have really ever talked about. Like, we've talked about pumping, and we've talked about like, returning to work and, stuff like that, reasons why people would need to do milk storage. But we've never even, I don't think, like, dedicated a whole episode to like milk storage guidelines.
No, and I'm sorry, but when I look at the milk storage guidelines laid out really nicely, I'm like, what? And people will message me and they'll be like, so, what about this and this situation? And I'll be like, oh, let me pull up a milk storage guideline thing. And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm sorry, it's confusing.
And there's different situations.
And there's some of them are different from each other.
Right. And then I have had situations come up that, like, I remember one time, and hopefully this doesn't happen to people on the regular, but I had a mom that messaged me, and she was a client for quite a while, and the freezer door had been left a little bit open, like their big deep freeze. And she had like 500 ounces of milk in there or something. And
I've heard of that. That actually does happen.
Yeah.
I don't know about on the regular, but I've heard people have messaged me about that too.
And was freaking out, which I don't blame her, and her husband was like, oh my God, look at all the steaks. And she was like, I don't care about the steaks. Like, like this is
my meat.
Like, look at my milk. But I, I'm like, you know what? Let me look. And, I'm like doing all the research and researching all this stuff. And what it came down to was refreeze it. It's fine. Like, there was no actual research that was out there. And I looked on Kelly Mom. If anybody doesn't know kellymom.com, it is a great resource. There's tons of information on kellymom.com. And one of the great things with that is that she also puts links to where the research comes from, which is fantastic. So you could even like look back to where these studies came from. So I took the time to really, research this as much as I could, and found that there really was no definitive research to say that if you refreeze it, it's bad. So, I mean, I did find a lot of things that said, even if there's some ice particles still in the milk, definitely refreeze it.
That's what I've always heard, is that even if there's like the tiniest bit of like slushiness to it, just refreeze it.
And
it's not even technically thawed. So
right. So I like passed it by her pediatrician who I knew, and her pediatrician's like, you know what? I trust your judgment on this. I don't blame you. Like, yeah. And I told him, like, it's fine. Just refreeze it. And we refroze it. But we saved like 500 ounces of milk. So if people don't realize that that's okay, they're just going to throw that away.
We're dumping out all that milk, yeah.
So, this is when I got that message about like, hey, have we done milk storage guidelines? I'm like, this is the kind of stuff we need to talk about. Not like, oh yeah, your milk is fine for 4 to 6 months in the freezer. I think everybody pretty much knows that, but we'll talk about it anyway. But it's these other little things that can happen, especially like power outages and stuff like that. And you've got milk in your freezer and you just like, what happens? I don't know. Is it okay?
Right. So, or like it says it's fine on the counter for 4 hours, and oops, it's been 6 hours. Oh, I better throw it out.
No, not throw that milk away.
I don't throw it away.
Yeah, never throw it away.
I mean, like, how often do you leave your, all the other kinds of milk on the counter? Like, you look at all the I mean, if you look at like, not to knock guidelines, because I mean, like, obviously we need them there for health and safety reasons, but like, some of the food guidelines are like, if you leave your guacamole out for more than 15 minutes, you need to throw it away. And I'm not throwing out my guacamole.
And everybody does something different.
It's been out for the whole party. Like, I'm going to put it back.
Right, I know, right? My husband's mother, Tom's mom, God bless her, we lost her a few months ago, but she was very, like, nervous about food stuff. And if meat was out for longer than like cooked meat would be cooked and served at dinner. And if you didn't get up and like put it away right away, she would be like, you have to put that meat away. It's going to go bad. You have to put that meat away. It's going to go bad. So Tom's kind of like that, too. Like, not to that extreme, and then I came from a family where it was like, we didn't do that. Like, we didn't leave it out for excessive periods of time, but we weren't like, okay, the meal has been served. Let me put everything away quick before I eat. Like, it just we didn't do that.
Yeah. My mom keeps butter on the counter.
I grew up with people that did that.
I mean, the butter lives on the counter. Like, it's not like, oh, she moved it. Like, it just lives on the counter. I'm like, ew. That's gross.
Yeah. I mean, I dated a guy once who they used to put their leftover pizza in the cupboard. Like, I don't know what that was about, but like, they would
oh my god!
They'd put it on a plate and stick it in the cupboard. Like, I thought that was so strange, but whatever.
Like a sausage pizza.
Yeah, they could have pepperoni on it. Like, it was weird. It was weird. But like, so everybody does something a little bit different. But So
they do. And there's all of these, like, you can go online and there are official, like, things about all the food and what you're supposed to do with them. And no one is doing that.
They aren't. It is crazy. So with milk.
So I don't think we're not saying, like, toss out your milk storage guideline thing. Like, just ignore it. Like, that's not what we're saying.
No, but what I usually come across is, like, people will say, so what do you recommend? Because when I look it up, I see 4 hours is fine, 6 hours is fine, 5 hours, like what? So I'm always like, you know what? Like, I kind of use the 5-5-5 rule when it comes to that, but some people use, like, you know, the 6 hour rule. Some people use 4. What I think is important for everybody to realize is when you're, like, if you're leaving milk out, if you pump it or whatever, and then you leave it out, or the baby didn't finish a bottle and you leave it out, whatever. Human milk has live white blood cells in it, so it does not breed bacteria as quickly as regular food does. I think that's a very important piece for people to understand, because for us to just say, oh yeah, just leave your milk out, it's fine. It's like, but there's a reason why it's fine. Mm-hmm. And it's fine because it does not breed bacteria the way regular food breeds bacteria. Like, you can't do that with formula because formula will become bacteria ridden. So that is why you cannot leave formula out and you have to throw it away. Breast milk is not the same as that. It does not carry that kind of bacteria with it. In fact, they've done research on it. And if you pump milk and leave it out, it has less bacteria in it after a couple of hours because the white blood cells will kill it. So it's just not the same. That's why it's safe. So it's okay. Like, people can feel comfortable and confident leaving their milk out for a couple of hours. Nothing's going to happen to it. And that's really important in situations like maybe moms that, like, pump in the middle of the night. And then they're like, then I got to get up and go downstairs. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's fine. Like, leave it out, or bring a cooler up to your room, like one of those little travel coolers or something, and, you know, or a little lunch bag or something, and, you know, keep it. You don't need to be running it to the refrigerator as soon as it's pumped. It's okay. You can if you want to, if that's convenient for you, but you don't have to. Or some people, like at work, who pump at work, who don't want to put their milk in a shared refrigerator. That's fine too. Yeah. You can put it in a little cooler. So if you are pumping milk and you want to leave it out on the counter, you can leave it out for 6 hours, 5 hours, 4 hours, whatever. There is no, like, okay, it can only be 4 hours. It can only be 5. You know, it could be any of those. It's okay.
Okay. So here's my question. What if it's 6.5 hours?
I would still go out on a limb and say it's fine.
So when is it, like, because what if, this is where I get really annoying. What if it's like 7 hours and you're like, oh crap, I forgot this was over here. Oh man, it's been 7 hours. Like, at what point do you got to be like, yeah, I really need to throw this away?
I think if it's been like, I would say like probably 8, 9, 10 hours, you know, like it got left out, like you came home from work, you know, left it out sitting and it sat out for like 12 hours and you didn't even realize it or whatever. I might go, oh,
yeah,
that's kind of, yeah. But just because there isn't a lot of research on that
right.
I know of on that kind of longevity, you know?
Yeah.
So maybe better safe than sorry, but never throw it away. Use it for something else.
Yeah, that's the other thing is that you can use this stuff for so many things. You can use it. You can make things out of it. You can just throw it in their bath. Right. You can throw it, you know.
Use it for like ear infections and stuff like that. Like, it's just, it
can make jewelry. I have all this breast milk jewelry.
It's so cool.
Like these little keepsakes. Yeah. It's so awesome.
I wish they were doing that when I breastfed my kids.
I know. It's so brand new.
It is.
That's what I hear from people all the time. They're like, oh man, I wish this was a thing.
I know, I really do. But it's, you know, and I don't meet too many people who say, oh, I left my milk out and completely forgot about it. It's been 10 hours. Right. But if that, you know, were to happen, if you have a cooler, like if you're somebody who is like, you know, maybe traveling or with a cooler, or you're putting your breast milk in a cooler or something like that, like one of those little handheld ones or like a little lunch bag with some ice packs in it or whatever, it'll keep for like 24 hours in there. Mm-hmm. So that's a situation where, you know, it's fine if you're not sure, I don't know when I'm going to get to a refrigerator. Those are really easy things to have on hand. So you can always just stick it in one of those and it'll keep for 24 hours.
Okay. So that's the 24 hours. So it's a counter is like 4, 5, 6 is what the general thing is.
Uh-huh.
I think we should ignore 4.
Yeah, ignore 4.
4 is like if it's like 4 hours, don't throw it away.
No.
It's totally fine.
And the other thing is that I sometimes come across is if you are doing one thing with milk, that doesn't mean you can't do another. You know what I mean? Like if you leave it out for 5 hours, 6 hours, and then go, oh, you know what? I'm home now. I can just breastfeed the baby. We don't need to give him this bottle. Put it in the refrigerator. Just because it's sat out doesn't mean you can't put it away now. Or just because milk was in the refrigerator for 5 days doesn't mean you can't put it in the freezer if you're not going to use it. You know,
right.
I've had people ask about that too. And they're like, well, what if you don't use it? What if it's in the refrigerator for 4 or 5 days and you don't use it? Put it in the freezer. Just because it was in the refrigerator doesn't mean you can't freeze it.
Yeah, right.
So
yeah, salvage it.
Right, salvage it. There's no reason why you can't. Human milk is not as destructible as people think it is.
Yeah, I know. It's just like they're all the food safety stuff, so we get like kind of freaky about it. But breast milk is different.
It's very different. So if you're doing 5-6 hours or whatever on the counter, and then you can do that same amount of time in days in the refrigerator. So, and my thing with the refrigerator is if you have bottles of milk in the refrigerator and you haven't used it in 5 days, you probably are going to have more milk coming in behind it. You know what I mean? So it's you don't need all those bottles of milk in the refrigerator, most likely.
Yeah. Throw them in the freezer.
Yeah. So just throw them in the freezer and they'll freeze fine. And they'll stay in the freezer depending on what kind of freezer you have. So if you have just a regular refrigerator freezer, put them in the back where it's really cold and they'll keep for 6 months in there. If you have a standalone freezer or a deep freezer, a year easily in those. Don't add, there's a couple things with it. So a couple of no-nos with breast milk for sure, but don't add fresh milk to frozen milk. That's something that we always say, that's probably not the best thing to do. It's to, oh, I just pumped this milk. Let me pour it into this half bottle that's already in the freezer. Don't do that. And if it's already defrosted, as far as okay, it's been sitting out, I'm going to stick it back for hours and hours, totally defrosted, drank half a bottle or whatever, you do have to use it once you do that with it. You shouldn't be back and forth and back and forth. Think about if you take something out of the freezer to eat for dinner and you defrost it and you're ready to cook it, are you going to put it back in the freezer if you change your mind? You're probably not going to, it's just, you're going to use it. So that's what we want you to do with your breast milk too. And that's why we always say too, freeze in small quantities,
Yeah, right.
Freeze in small, 2-3 ounce increments so that you're not defrosting more than what you need. And it's really easy to defrost. I mean, I don't know if you ever really had to, I know you didn't really pump too much, which was good. And I didn't pump that much either, but it is really easy to defrost.
Yes. And let's talk more about defrosting milk after a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Fairhaven Health. The Milky's Milk Saver on the Go is a mini version of the original Milk Saver loved by so many. The original Milk Saver is perfect for using on the opposite breast while breastfeeding to collect the letdown. But what about in between feedings or when you are out and about? The Milk Saver on the Go is a discreet breast milk collection system designed to collect leaking breast milk when you are not feeding so you don't waste any more breast milk to a breast pad. The breast shells can be tucked right inside your shirt and then place your nipple right in the hole. The unique oblong shape allows you to collect more milk than other brands. Each shell holds 1 ounce of milk, and people are collecting several ounces a day to add to their stash. It's not a pump. There is no work for you to do. It also helps protect sore nipples from rubbing and chafing while they heal. Head to fairhavenhealth.com, that is FAIRHAVEN health.com, and use promo code BADASS for 10% off your purchase. And today's episode is also brought to you by the Family Wellness Summit. And Dianne and I are going to be a part of this summit that is hosted by the Real Crunchy Mama, who you can follow on Instagram. This free 5-day virtual conference is being held all online January 1st through the 5th, meaning you can watch it from anywhere, anytime, on any device. The summit is geared toward anyone interested in living a more natural lifestyle, and they have over 40 amazing presenters, including doctors, educators like us, and world leaders in holistic modalities, natural remedies, and family health care. Some topics include breastfeeding, midwifery, chiropractic care, homeopathy, herbal remedies, and much more. Registration has begun for the free pass, and you can pre-order an all-access pass for just $89. This is a great deal that gives you access to all the videos for 1 year, plus extras such as downloads, bonus videos, and discounts, coupons, and special discounted packages created just for all-access pass holders. You guys are not going to want to miss this. So if you are a natural newbie, or you're just crunchy curious, or already a holistic mama, go to www.familywellnesssummit2020.com. That's www.familywellnesssummit2020.com and register today. These sponsor links and their promo codes can all be found at Badass Breastfeeding Podcast, along with all of our breastfeeding resources, all of our other episodes, and information about how you can schedule your very own lactation consultation with Dianne.
So
breast milk. We were talking about breast milk. We were talking about breast milk.
Woohoo! Breast milk. It's good.
No.
Use it.
The no-nos.
Yeah,
yes, it's good. The no-nos.
So the no-nos for a couple of things. Like I'm trying to go back to things that people always ask me about that we don't typically talk about. Because when you look up milk storage guidelines, it'll say this long on the counter, this long in the freezer, whatever, blah blah blah. But sometimes people will say to me, what if I pump 3 times in a day? Can I put that milk together? Can I add milk to milk already in the refrigerator? Or do I have to have 15 bottles of half an ounce each, sitting around?
Yeah, right.
If you pump it within the same day, you can put it together. You can mix it together. So a great example of this is our sponsor, Fairhaven Health, with the Milk Saver. You're getting little bits of, not little, you might get a half an ounce when you use that. So mix it all together throughout the day, and make 1 bottle with it. And then, you can stick that in the freezer, stick in the refrigerator. If it's in the same day, you can mix them together. It's not recommended to mix milk from different days together into the same bottle. If you take out a bottle, like we were saying, from the freezer and it's already fully defrosted, you plan to use it, you take it to daycare, they don't use it, you come back, it's, you can't just stick it back in the freezer. That's kind of a no-no. Like we were saying earlier, if there's still a little bit of, coldness to it as far as slushiness, I think you said it was, that kind of thing, then definitely refreeze it. But if it's been defrosted for a while, then you probably should not refreeze that.
But don't throw it away.
No.
You just don't dump it down the sink. Just keep it into a separate section, because you might come across, I have a breast milk bag in my freezer that I keep just for breast milk jewelry and stuff. It is from 2014. It's gross. I look at it, I'm like, ew, this is so gross. But I could just defrost, and I defrost it and I take a little bit out for the breast milk jewelry that I make. And then I just throw it in the freezer again.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
It's so nasty, but it's my breast milk and I'm not feeding it to anybody.
Right, yeah.
But you don't throw it away, because there's things that you can do with it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And
especially if you do it fresh like that. Yeah, we should. Were you going to say we should do an episode?
Well, I know that we have somewhere along the way, I remember reading all the things that you can do with breast milk.
Yeah.
With just random, if you have it left over, and like that.
You can make lotion, you can make soap, you can make jewelry, you can just put it straight up on your own face, dealing with rashes or acne or your baby.
Yeah.
On their diaper rash, you can put it on your nipples, for cracked or for
anything. Yeah.
For sore.
Anything. It's just so healthy.
So many things you could do.
Yeah, there's so many things you can do with it. I had somebody asked me one time, or this situation came up once, which I hope this doesn't happen to anybody, but I'm putting it out there. Keep in your mind, somebody tell me that their daycare, the refrigerator at the daycare, like, I didn't like get, I think maybe it broke or it stopped working or something like that. But the guidelines of the state for the daycare said that if the refrigerator went below 32 degrees, they had to throw everything in it away.
Mm-hmm.
So they threw the breast milk away. And I was like, oh my God, it was fine. You know, like it was fine. You can keep it. And she goes, I know it was fine, but their regulations were that they had to throw it away. So if you are somebody who has your child at daycare, like that's a situation that doesn't happen probably that frequently. But I would definitely make it noted somewhere along the way when you bring your child to this daycare and you're bringing them human milk, I would say to them, if there's ever a question about the milk, hand it back to me. Do not throw it away. Yeah. Because you could have taken that milk and brought it home and used it. But they just threw it away because that was their guideline of what they had to do at the daycare. They couldn't give it to the baby. They had to throw it away. So always make sure that whoever your provider is for your children, if you're going back to work, that they know to never throw the milk away, ever. To hand it back to you.
Yeah, and only bring like as much as they're going to need for that one day.
Right, yeah.
Just because, you know, you just don't, if something does happen, you don't want to have like gobs of milk there.
And, you know, when somebody, the milk storage thing, I think is something that we don't really think to tell other people necessarily. And even if you have somebody watching your child who's a family member, they might not realize that the milk is fine. You know, like, so if you have a 3-ounce bottle of milk and your baby only takes an ounce, you can leave it out for a couple of hours and give it to them the next feeding. That's perfectly okay. You can't use the same bottle all day long, obviously, because bacteria will start growing with the, you know, from the saliva from the baby's mouth transferring to the nipple of the bottle. Mm-hmm. But you can reuse it for the very next feeding. And I've had moms tell me that their caretakers, whether it be their mother-in-law or whatever, would just throw it away because in their mind, you couldn't save it. Because you can't do that with formula.
Right.
So they would just keep throwing it away. And then I'd have these moms, you know, contacting me saying, why I'm trying to keep up. I can't keep up. I need more milk. It's, you know, I'm trying to pump more. And when you got right down to it, it was because they were throwing it away. And I'm like, tell them to stop throwing it away. You know, like this is what they're throwing away like a couple ounces a day. And it's like, stop throwing the milk away. There's nothing wrong with it. So that making sure your caretakers have very specific instructions with human milk is important, because just kind of taking advantage of the fact maybe they know, or just kind of assuming that they know, okay, you know, give this bottle. If your baby does not finish the bottle, make sure they do not throw that milk away. It's just like, that's just a really important piece of milk storage guidelines that I think people don't really specify. So make sure if it's frozen and your freezer breaks down, you do not have to throw all that milk away. You can, you know, if it's still cold, if it's still like, you know, little ice pieces in it, you can go ahead and refreeze it. If it's been out on the counter for a few hours, totally okay. You can still use it or put it in the refrigerator. What were some of the other ones that people had? Trying to think of, we were mentioning earlier in the show. I think leaving it out is really the biggest. That's really the biggest one.
Leaving it out and then it becoming like when can you put it back in the freezer?
Yeah.
You know, like, can I freeze it again, or it's been what is it in the refrigerator? 5 days?
I would go like 6 even in the refrigerator. I would do like 6 days. But then again, like I said, like if you're somebody who pumps regularly because you're back to work or whatever, you're just going to constantly be having milk in the refrigerator. So if you haven't used it in 5 or 6 days, I would definitely put it in the freezer, because you're just going to have more coming, you know? So you don't need to have like tons and tons and tons of milk in your refrigerator. Just have enough for whatever you need. You know, like if your baby goes to daycare or you're leaving your baby with a babysitter or whatever, then just keep out what you need for that day and the rest can be frozen.
Right. And be mindful of like making sure that you're labeling your bags. So then you're using the oldest milk first.
Yes.
You know, and that's a good way to keep it like fresh too, is don't, you know, like whatever is the oldest milk is what you're going to be pulling out of the freezer.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Make sure you're dating things. The other thing that too that's come up that I never really thought about before because it's been so long since I've pumped. People tell me all the time that when you pump in the bottles and then pour it into the bags, it doesn't equate. You know, it's not the same. So they're like the measurements are off or, you know, whatever. So it's like, write it on the bag what you're putting in there, you know, because it might, and plus by the time it freezes, it looks different, you know, like it might, especially if you lay it flat, if you're using baggies and you lay it flat, and then it might like.
Oh, then you can't tell how much is in there. Yeah.
So probably, you know, like note on there the date. I have had people ask me if they need, like, if they pump milk at 7 p.m., do they have to give
I was
it
just going to say that.
Yeah. That
just going to say
is
that.
way too much work. I'm sorry. Like if
it's not necessary.
It is not necessary to give milk. I know we always make this big deal about, oh my gosh, your milk changes constantly for your baby. And people are like, but what if I pump? Then the baby isn't getting the milk for that time of day. It's fine. It is fine.
Yeah.
It's totally
You're
okay.
still giving them breast milk. It's like you can't do any better than that.
It is totally fine. Do not worry about that. If you pumped it at a certain time, you have to give it at that certain time. That's okay. You do not have to do that.
Like if you love to do that, then fine. But don't feel like you have to.
Yeah. And that's a good point, because for me to even think about that is so overwhelming that I'm like, oh my God, really I can't even wrap my head around that. But somebody else might feel very comfortable doing that. So like if that's your comfort level and that's what you want to do, and it's easy for you to make that happen. But for somebody like me who flies by the seat of her pants, I can't even consider that, because that's way too much organization for me.
Yeah.
So it really, like, what it comes down to is like this human milk, like we were saying earlier, is very resilient. And you do not have to just like, oh, it's been out for 7 hours, I'm going to toss it or anything like that. It's resilient. It really is. So you don't have to get rid of it. You can keep it. Milk storage guidelines can be very confusing, but feel confident that if it's been in the refrigerator for several days, it's fine. If it's been sitting out on the counter for several hours, it's fine. You can put it in the refrigerator. If it's been sitting out, put it in the refrigerator. You can keep it in a cooler for 24 hours. If you're traveling with it, we do have an episode on like traveling and stuff, but if you are traveling with it, you know, you can freeze it where you are, travel with it, and then put it back in the freezer when you get home, because it probably hasn't completely defrosted, depending on how far you're traveling. But there's lots of ways to be able to keep your breast milk and not have to throw it away.
Yeah. I mean, the storage guidelines are pretty strict. They're very much on the conservative side.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would feel comfortable stretching it a little bit.
Yeah, you totally can. And I think the other thing to remember too is that this is just a small amount of milk that your baby's getting in a 24-hour period of time. You know, so if you're like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm not sure if the baby, you know, should be having this milk because I didn't pump it at the right time, blah, blah, blah. Like the rest of the day, like that's just one feeding that they're going to have all day long. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if this is even making sense. In my head, this makes a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah.
It's one feeding in the realm of their entire day. So it's not going to be terrible for them.
Right. And if your question, I mean, if it's, you know, so what happens after, like, it goes rotten and they'll get sick?
I don't.
Like what?
No, like,
I think it's just a matter of like, it's not as nutrient dense anymore.
Right.
Like some of that good, all the good stuff has just gone away.
Right. No, and I know that it does like go bad as far as like you could smell it or whatever if it's been a very long time. But I've never had anybody tell me that it gets to that point, because really it doesn't. You know, like who's leaving breast milk in the refrigerator
That's
for
a really, really long time.
It would be a really long time.
That would be like an experiment you might want to do if you
absolutely
really wanted to see what happened.
But when people tell me, oh, I found this bag of breast milk in my freezer, my baby's 17 months now, it's probably at least that old. I'm going to tell them, you know what, mix it into their food. Put it into a smoothie. Put it into, like, it just loses some nutrients. It's
right.
not,
it's not like it's bad now and like you got to throw it away. It's not like, you know, the cow's milk that's turned green.
No.
You know, it's not that.
No.
It's just that some of the, like the nutrients are not as present anymore. Right.
And again,
but they can still drink it.
Yeah, it's a small amount for their whole. I don't know that I would give them breast milk that was 17 months old for days at a time, because, you know, it's to a newborn, you know what I mean? Like, it's just that's not what they need.
Yeah.
But for your toddler and it's your milk and you happen to come across it and, you know, I would defrost it and put it in something, because it doesn't go bad to like that. It just loses some of its nutritional value. That's all.
Right.
It's not like
still might taste good in their.
Right. It'll be fine if you put it
whatever.
in their food. It's not a big deal. Mix it in their cereal or something.
Yeah.
So
cool. Yeah. That was very informative.
I like to try to be informative at times.
Success.
Yes. I have all this information in my brain, and sometimes it's hard to get it out.
I know. That's why it's like so great to do this podcast, so we can just like really get it out, get it all out.
Because really, this information that I have in my brain is useless to anybody who's not a breastfeeding mother. Like, it's like, honestly,
anybody else who's listening to you throughout your day does not need to know.
They don't. No, they do not. They're like, I'm not even talking to you because it doesn't make any sense if it's doesn't have anything to do with breastfeeding.
Yeah.
But so that's it.
Thank you for listening.
And if you have anything specific that we didn't touch on, then, you know, definitely reach out. I don't want anybody to go, oh my God, I don't know what to do with this milk. So
I just listened to this 36-minute episode and I have no idea what to do with this situation that I'm
more confused now than I was.
Just ask us.
Yeah. Which I would totally understand that, because I don't know where to put my pizza after this episode.
Right, I know. Yeah, you can pretty much do anything with the breast milk. Just don't put it in the cupboard with the pizza.
Or, leave it on the counter indefinitely with the butter. Yes.
Yeah. Oh.
All right. But so definitely keep listening. Listen next week. We'll have more fun stuff for you.
Yes.
Bye.